single dad fell asleep on the CEO's shoulder. She didn't move for 3 hours straight. Somebody move him. That's disgusting. Bianca Crale lifted her phone and started filming, loud enough for the whole row to hear. The cabin of Flight 1147 had dimmed for the red eye, but Bianca made sure everyone was awake for this. She angled the camera at the man slumped against the woman by the window, his head fallen onto a stranger's shoulder, mouth slightly open, dead to the world. "Look at this," she narrated to her followers, her voice dripping with delight. "Some drunk just passed out on a poor woman in 14A. People have no shame anymore." Across the aisle, Gregory Voss smirked into his whiskey. "Probably hasn't paid for a seat in his life," he muttered. 2 rows up, a teenager giggled. A flight attendant hovered, uncertain. The man's jacket was cheap and rain-stained. His boots scuffed down to the leather. A frayed duffel jammed under the seat in front of him. He looked exactly like the kind of person Bianca built her brand mocking. The woman he'd fallen against was Catherine Hale. And Catherine did not move. She could have. Anyone watching expected her to recoil, to flag the attendant, to demand a different seat the way a woman in a $4,000 coat usually would. Instead, she sat perfectly still, one hand resting lightly over the man's where it had gone slack on the armrest, and she met Bianca's camera with a look that could freeze an engine. "Lower your phone," Catherine said quietly. Bianca laughed. Or what? What Bianca didn't know was that the drunk had not had a drink in 3 years. What Gregory didn't know was that the man's name was already moving across every news feed in the country, attached to a word Gregory had never earned in his life: hero. And what neither of them knew was that by the time this plane touched down, Bianca's video would have ended her career. Gregory's deal would be dead in the water, and the woman in 14A, the one they assumed was just an unlucky stranger, would be the single most powerful person on the aircraft. But for now, Catherine simply turned back to the window, adjusted her shoulder so the exhausted man's neck wouldn't cramp, and let him sleep. 38 hours earlier, David Mercer had not yet slept at all. The snow had started on I-70 just after 4 in the morning. By the time David's ambulance reached mile marker 218, the highway was a graveyard of metal, 11 cars, a jackknifed semi, a minivan crushed beneath it like a soda can. David had been a paramedic for 9 years, and he'd learned to read a scene in the first 3 seconds. This one took less than that. He was already running before his partner killed the engine. He worked the line of wreckage car by car, his knees in the slush, his hands going numb inside torn gloves. He triaged the ones he could save and forced himself past the ones he couldn't. And then he heard it. A child, screaming, from inside the minivan under the semi, where a thin curl of smoke had begun rising from the crumpled hood. The other responders shouted at him to wait for the fire crew. David didn't wait. He went in through the shattered rear window on his stomach, broken glass opening a line across his forearm he wouldn't notice for hours, and he found a little girl no older than his own daughter, pinned but alive. He talked to her the whole time he worked her free. He told her his name. He told her she was brave. He carried her out 40 seconds before the engine block caught. He didn't go home after his shift ended at dawn. He sat in the ambulance bay with a cup of coffee he never drank, shaking, the way he always did once it was over and there was finally room to feel it. That was when his phone rang. It was his mother-in-law, Ruth, in Chicago, where 7-year-old Maya had been staying for the week while David pulled the holiday rotation. Ruth's voice was the careful, flattened kind of calm that meant she was trying very hard not to frighten him. "David, honey, don't panic. Maya's okay. But we're at the hospital. Her appendix." They're taking her into surgery tonight, and she keeps asking for you." David did not remember deciding to go to the airport. He remembered standing at a counter in his uniform, still smelling of smoke, buying the last seat on the 11:40 red-eye to Chicago with a credit card he'd been afraid to use all month. He remembered the gate agent's face when she saw the blood dried on his sleeve and quietly waived the bag fee. He remembered thinking, "Just stay awake until you're holding her hand." He had been awake for 38 hours. He had $11 in his checking account and a child waiting in a hospital 800 miles away, and he was holding himself together with nothing but the thought of her face. He folded his long frame into seat 14B, the middle, and tried to make himself small. Out of his duffel slipped a single sheet of paper, a child's drawing, crayon, 2 stick figures holding hands under a lopsided sun. "My dad the hero," it said in careful, backward-leaning letters. He tucked it back without a word. He didn't know the woman by the window had already seen it. Catherine Hale almost hadn't taken this flight. She was the founder and chief executive of Hale Biosystems, the company whose portable defibrillators hung on the wall of nearly every ambulance and airport in the country, and she had a private charter waiting that she'd waved off on a whim. Too much fog, too much fuss, and some restless part of her that was tired of arriving everywhere alone. So she'd bought a commercial seat under her own name, and now a stranger in a bloodied uniform was lowering himself beside her, radiating the particular silence of a man at the absolute end of himself. "Long day?" she asked, not really expecting an answer. He gave her a small, exhausted smile. Something like that. His voice was rough. "Sorry in advance. I don't think I'm going to be great company." His eyes had already started to close. He fought it, jerked upright, apologized again. "My daughter's having surgery tonight. I just need to." And then the sentence simply ran out of road, and David Mercer was asleep before he finished it, his head tipping gently sideways until it came to rest against Catherine's shoulder. She went very still, not from discomfort, from recognition. She had buried a husband 4 years ago and learned exactly what this kind of tired looked like. The tired that isn't about sleep at all. She looked down at the dried blood on his sleeve, at the EMP badge clipped to his belt, at the crayon drawing peeking from the duffel by his boots, and Catherine Hale, who negotiated 9-figure contracts before breakfast and was known across 3 industries as the Ice Queen, made a decision she could not have explained to a single member of her board. She decided not to move. What the people filming her didn't know was that she'd already glanced at her phone the moment she sat down and seen the breaking alert with a grainy photo of a paramedic carrying a child from a burning car on I-70. She hadn't connected it yet to the man beside her. She would. Soon enough, they all would. It took less than 20 minutes for Bianca to escalate. Filming hadn't gotten her the reaction she wanted, so she pressed the call button 3 times until the flight attendant, a tired woman named Diane, came down the aisle. "I want him moved," Bianca announced. "I don't feel safe. He's clearly intoxicated, and he's all over that woman. I'm a Premier member, and I'm telling you I don't feel safe." She said safe the way some people say it, not as fear, but as a weapon, the magic word that makes staff jump. Diane leaned in, lowering her voice. "Ma'am, he's sleeping. He's not bothering. He's bothering me." Bianca's phone was up again. "Are you refusing to help a passenger? I have 2 million followers, and this is going up tonight." Catherine spoke without raising her voice. "He's a paramedic coming off a 36-hour shift, and his daughter is in surgery tonight. He is not in my way. He is not in yours." She held Diane's eyes. "Leave him. I'll take responsibility." Diane, who had worked this route for 11 years and could spot a genuinely good person at 40 rows, gave Catherine the smallest grateful nod and walked away. Bianca turned the camera on Catherine instead. "Wow, defending the drunk. Make sure you tag yourself, sweetie. Catherine looked directly into the lens, and for one cold second something flickered in Bianca's face, a dim animal sense that she might have miscalculated. Then, she shook it off and went back to her seat to draft the caption. David slept through all of it. He didn't know a stranger was guarding his rest with her own reputation. He didn't know yet what she'd just bought him with it. Gregory Voss decided to make it his business too. He was a man who measured every room by where he ranked in it, and the math of this one displeased him. First-class seat, custom suit, and yet somehow the gravity of the cabin had bent toward a sleeping nobody in row 14. He twisted around. "You know," he said to Catherine in the carrying tone of a man who enjoys an audience, "people like that count on people like you." Soft touch. He'll wake up, sob a story, ask for a ride, ask for cash. I've seen it 100 times. He smiled like he was doing her a favor. "I'm in business. I read people. Trust me, that's not a hero. That's a freeloader who got lucky with a window seat." Catherine studied him for a long moment. "What business are you in, Mr. Voss?" Gregory Voss. He straightened, pleased to be asked. "Medical device distribution. As a matter of fact, I'm flying out to close a partnership with one of the biggest names in the sector. Hale Biosystems." He let the name land like a coin on a counter. "So believe me, I know value when I see it. And that," he tilted his chin at the sleeping man, "is not it." Something in Catherine's expression went perfectly smooth, the way still water goes right before it freezes. "How interesting," she said. "I'd love to hear all about that deal." She turned back to the window. Below the wing, a small motion drew her eye. In his sleep, David's hand had tightened, his brow furrowed, his lips moving around a name, Maya, even unconscious. Even at the floor of his own exhaustion, the man was still reaching for his daughter. Catherine felt something in her chest she hadn't allowed herself to feel in 4 years. She shifted, just slightly, so his head rested easier. Whatever this man was, she already knew Gregory Voss had it exactly backwards. They were 90 minutes out from Chicago when the cabin changed. It started 3 rows back, a strangled cough. A woman's voice rising into panic. "Walter?" Walter, an elderly man, had slumped sideways, gone gray, his hand clawing at his collar. His wife was shaking him and getting nothing back. "Help! Somebody! He's not breathing right, please." Diane was already moving, snatching the intercom. "Is there a medical professional on board?" Passengers froze. Phones came out. Nobody stood. David Mercer's eyes opened. He didn't surface slowly. One instant he was unconscious, and the next he was vertical in the aisle, every trace of exhaustion burned off by the only thing on earth that could cut through 38 hours of nothing. "I'm a paramedic. Let me through." He reached Walter in 4 strides, 2 fingers already at the man's throat. No pulse. He's in arrest. "I need the ED, the defibrillator, the wall by the galley. Go." Diane ran. David flattened the old man into the aisle and started compressions, counting under his breath, his whole body driving down through his palms. "Stay with me, Walter. You don't get to check out on me tonight. Not on my flight." Diane skidded back with the unit. David tore it open, slapped the pads to Walter's bare chest with a speed that came from 1,000 worse nights than this. The device chirped its analysis. Clear. Nobody was filming now. Bianca had both hands over her mouth. The whole cabin had gone silent enough to hear the machine speak. Shock advised. David pressed the button. Walter's body jolted. David was back on his chest before the count finished. 2 breaths, 30 compressions, his torn forearm bleeding again through his sleeve, and he didn't so much as glance at it. "Come on. Come on." And then, a cough. A ragged, beautiful, furious cough. Walter's eyes fluttered. His wife collapsed against the seat, sobbing. David sat back on his heels, pressed 2 fingers to the old man's neck again, and finally let out a breath of his own. "There you are," he said softly. "There you are." The cabin broke into applause. David didn't seem to hear it. He stayed on the floor with Walter, talking him through, until the man's color came back. Only then did he notice the defibrillator still blinking in his hands and the logo stamped across its case. Hale Biosystems. He almost smiled. Good machine. He'd used 100 of them. He didn't know its founder was watching him from 11 rows up with tears standing in her eyes. By the time David made it back to his seat, his hands were trembling, not from fear, but from the crash that always came after. Catherine handed him a bottle of water without a word. He drank half of it in one pull. "Thank you," he managed. "And I'm sorry about earlier, falling asleep on you." "That was don't," Catherine said gently. "You needed it." She paused. "Your daughter. The surgery. Is she? Appendix. She's 7. His voice cracked on the number. "She's in Chicago. I've been trying to get to her since this morning." He scrubbed a hand down his face. "I worked a wreck on I-70 last night. Bad one. And then Maya. I just keep thinking if I can get there before she wakes up from the..." He stopped, embarrassed by the size of his own fear in front of a stranger. "You will," Catherine said, and she believed it, and somehow he did too. They talked, low and easy, for the rest of the flight. He told her about Maya's drawings and her late mother's laugh that lived on in her. She told him, carefully, about losing her husband, about building a company so big she sometimes forgot to be a person inside it. 2 widowed parents, 800 miles in the dark, finding in each other the one thing money had never once bought either of them: to be seen exactly as they were. Neither of them knew that the story of the 2 of them was, at that very moment, already breaking apart across every screen in America, and that the consequences for the people who'd mocked him were only beginning. The plane landed at 6:12 a.m. into a terminal that already knew his name. The wreck on I-70 had become the lead story overnight. Security video shows paramedic crawl into burning car to save child. And right beside it, climbing the trending list hour by hour, was a second video, Bianca Crowley's. She'd posted it mid-flight, captioned "Drunk passes out on poor woman lol some people." But the internet is faster than cruelty. Within hours, someone had matched the sleeping man's face to the paramedic on the news, and the comments had turned into an avalanche. "That's not a drunk. That's the man who saved a little girl 12 hours before you filmed him." The video Bianca had made to humiliate a stranger had become the most damning thing anyone had ever posted about her. As the seatbelt sign dinged off, Diane's voice came over the intercom, thick with emotion. "Ladies and gentlemen, before you deplane, most of you saw what happened in row 17 tonight. The man who saved that passenger's life is the same first responder who's been on the news all morning for pulling a child from a burning vehicle on I-70 yesterday. His name is David Mercer. He hasn't slept in 2 days, and he's racing to be with his own daughter, who's in surgery this morning. I'd say he's earned our patience." The cabin erupted. Strangers reached across seats to grip David's hand. Walter's wife was weeping again. David, overwhelmed, just kept saying, thank you, please, I just need to get to my kid." Bianca sat frozen, her champagne glass, poured to celebrate her viral post, stopped halfway to her lips. Gregory Voss had gone the color of old paper. And then Catherine Hale stood. She did not raise her voice. She didn't need to. "Mr. Voss," she said. And the whole cabin turned. "You mentioned a deal." "With Hale Biosystems." She let the silence stretch. I'm Catherine Hale. I founded that company, and I've just spent 3 hours watching you sneer at the best paramedic I've ever seen. A man who saved a life tonight using my defibrillator while you sat in first class and called him a freeloader. The blood drained entirely from Gregory's face. Mr. Mercer, she went on, turning to David, is precisely the kind of person my company exists to put equipment into the hands of. You are precisely the kind of person it should never do business with. The partnership is dead. Don't call my office. I miss Hale. I had no idea who you know, Catherine said quietly. You had no idea who he was. That was the whole problem. She turned her back on him. But the consequences were only starting. They started, in fact, before David had even reached the hospital. By Friday, Gregory Voss's distribution firm had lost not only the Hale Biosystems partnership, but 2 others. Word travels fast in a small industry, and no one wanted to be the company that built its name beside the man who'd publicly mocked a hero. His board asked for his resignation by the end of the month. He gave it. The last anyone heard, he was selling enterprise software in a different state, in a building where nobody knew the story, which was the only kind of building that would still have him. Bianca Kral's reckoning was louder. Her sponsors began dropping her within 24 hours. First the skincare brand, then the airline she'd tagged in her own post, then the management agency that had built her career. The video she'd made to shame a stranger was replayed 11 million times with a single caption appended by the internet. This is the man. Look him up. She posted a tearful apology. The comments turned that to ash, too. Some doors, once you've shown the world what's behind them, don't close again. She tried twice to reach David through the news outlets, to offer money, to offer a collaboration. He never answered. He had nothing to say to her. He was busy. When a reporter finally asked David how he felt about the people who'd mocked him on that flight, he thought about it for a long moment. He looked tired and kind and entirely without malice. I hope they're all right, he said. I really do. People are usually cruel because something in their own life hurts. I just hope they figure out what it is before it costs them anything else. Then he excused himself, because visiting hours were starting, and his daughter was awake. Maya's surgery had gone perfectly. David reached her room at 8:40 that morning, still in his bloodied uniform, and she lit up like the lopsided sun in her drawing. Daddy, you came. He gathered her up so carefully, mindful of the IV, and pressed his face into her hair and finally let himself cry, the good kind, the kind that means the worst is over. Of course I came. Bug, I'll always come. Catherine came too. She told herself, at first, that it was the defibrillator, that she wanted to follow up, that it was company business. It wasn't, and she stopped pretending after the second visit. She brought Maya a stack of fresh paper and the biggest box of crayons the hospital gift shop had. She sat on the edge of the bed and let a 7-year-old explain the rules of a game she was inventing as she went. And Catherine Hale, who had not lost a negotiation in 15 years, lost cheerfully, on purpose, for an hour. 3 months later, David woke at 6:30 in a small apartment that felt, for the first time in years, like it had enough air in it. Maya's new shoes sat by the door, purple, with stars, exactly the ones she'd wanted, finally not too small. He made coffee without counting the grounds. He packed a lunch and tucked a note inside it. Love you, Bug. Catherine's picking you up after art club. Maya loved art club. She loved, even more, that Catherine had become a word that meant someone who stayed. That evening the three of them ended up on the living room floor, a board game spread between them, Maya teamed up against the adults and beating them soundly. Outside, it had started to rain. Inside, it was warm. Catherine's hand found David's on the carpet and squeezed once. He squeezed back. On the wall above them hung Maya's drawing, the crayon one, my dad the hero. Except she'd added a third stick figure since the flight. Taller, in a long coat, holding David's other hand. Neither adult had mentioned it. Neither needed to. Maya, certain the grown-ups weren't listening, leaned over to whisper her secret plan to make them get married someday. David and Catherine heard every word. They pretended not to. They let her dream. Maybe someday. There was time now, and that was the whole point. For tonight, this was more than enough.